Good morning, everyone. My name is Sheila Khama. I'm speaking to you from Botswana. I'm privileged to be a member of the Board of Directors of Mines. Today, our goal is to discuss the Africa Free Trade Agreement that was recently renewed by many member states. Very specifically, the question we want to ask is, what does the recent launch of AfCFTA mean for me as an African? What can it do for me, and how can I participate? And to help us answer that question, I have a lineup of panelists. But before we start, Gelebrile is going to indulge us in a poem. Over to you, Lebo.
My Africa, my pride, my joy, the lioness, the queen. Wealth is her name. Her genetic makeup is resources. My Africa, your wealth. 40% of the world's gold reserves is in your bosom. 60% of the world's cobalt is milk for your daughters. 90% of the platinum reserves is the blood flowing through your veins. Nigeria, your daughter, is the biggest oil producer in the world. For God has anointed your head with oil, Africa, and your cup overflows. Your animalia kingdom, awestruck in wonder. 85% of the world's elephants are yours. 99% of the remaining lions belong to your kingdom. Daughter Tanzania holds the largest wildlife migration on Mother Earth. 25% of the world's birds are your inheritance. Oh, Africa, daughter of Mother Earth, God delights in you. You are abundant. You are wealthy. But let's fix your crown. It is muddy. It has been tainted with the stigma of poverty, the stigma of sickness and disease, the stigma of underdevelopment, the shame of lack. Is that true? Oh, Lioness Africa, are you poor? As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Elevate your thinking. Open your eyes and see your abundance. If wealth was a person, Africa, arise, lioness, and roar. Devour poverty from its roots. Break up your covenant with corruption. Seek wisdom and manage your resources. Your youth in the forefront of the battle, ready to break all chains binding you. Their faces of lions unstoppable. None among you shall lack, Africa. As the body functions as one, so shall you. Tariffs reduced, so trade amongst yourselves. Taste the diversity of your own markets. Enjoy the diverse jewelry from all over Africa. Enjoy different agricultural products from all around Africa. Trade among yourself. And therefore, there shall be increase of employment opportunities. Opportunities for all Africans. Arise and shine, Africa. Stand united. Let love spread among your daughters. Thank you.
Well, that was wonderful, Lebo. Well done. You've reminded us of an important fact. But it isn't the continent that is poor, it is its people. Hopefully at the end of this discussion, somehow we'll have created a glue between the people and the continent and its wealth, such that it flows directly to its people, and that we don't suffer the kind of stigmas that you so eloquently remind us of. Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to ask Dr. Nkosana to say a few words. Nkosana? I can't hear you, Dr. Nkosana. Are you with us?
Yeah, I was. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Please go ahead. I can both hear and see you.
Thank you.
Your sound is better than your look, but we'll deal with that.
Well, you know, that comes with age. Don't worry.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So thanks, Sheila, and thanks to our poet. We said everything we need to know. In many ways, there is very little for me to add, actually. I suppose the best I can do is to cast it in a different language, as poets often do. They say things in a manner which may not necessarily mean what we think, or all of us find different meanings in what they tell us. But let me reframe it in my own words. What our poet has just told us is that in terms of natural resources, there is virtually nobody else who can compete with the continent. When you look at the potential market of this continent, again, we are comparable to all the other parts of the world in terms of numbers of potential consumers. Our challenge is how we take this raw material and convert it into something, as Sheila says, which then reflects in the quality of life of the citizens of the continent. The continent is rich, the people are poor. And this is a contradiction which we need to deal with. What must we do? And we believe that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area potentially gives us an answer as a framework. But like all frameworks do, they create a possibility. The reality has to be created by us using that framework. And hopefully this is what we're doing. This is the journey we are on starting today. Firstly, to understand what the framework of the free trade area is, in order then to better understand what we can do as players within it in order to use it. On that note, I don't think I should take too much of our time, because I think we are interested to actually hear from the people, the experts, who tell us what it is, so that we can figure out what to do about it or with it. Thank you very much, and thanks, Sheila.
Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to welcome Mr. Martin Bwalya, the Director of Knowledge Management and Program Evaluation at NEPAD. We're hoping that Martin will help us with a clear description of what the Africa Free Trade Agreement is, and the practical implications of this trade to its people. Martin, you have only 10 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. And thank you to those remarks from Dr. Moyo and also from the poet. Can you see my slide?
I can. Please go ahead.
Okay. I want to use the slide, and I've tried to see how to effectively use my 10 minutes. I'm not presenting all the slides, but they will be shared for people to indulge with them. And definitely then we can discuss further with those that are interested. So to kickstart the discussion, I want to give a very brief preamble, just 2 points. One is that we're looking, and there's a huge youth message in this seminar. And I want to say that first and foremost, it's important to appreciate that youth is not a future concept. Future is about today and now, and is very much about what we need to do, all of us, adults and the youth today, in terms of that future situation. Individuals will come in and out, but youth will remain. If you're looking at the future, there will still be youth that time, and that will be different individuals. So this conversation is very much about how and what we need to do today as youths and adults together. I also, second point in the preamble is that many times we look at development action as a responsibility of government. I think in the context of also the rationale for this seminar is that the citizenry responsibility and action is a critical part of successful implementation and delivering on development. And therefore, my hope is that this conversation is not just about nice discussions, but that together we are cultivating that citizenry responsibility and can see what we do as we go forward. And of course, as mentioned in the poem and from Dr. Moyo, the potential or the CFTA is about how we convert potential to real value for our people. Many people will tell you that we shall not eat potential, and we've been told about good potential, but we're still suffering. And therefore, the Agenda 2023 and CFTA are actually about those means and mechanisms that we can move from potential to realizing the real value of our resources as a continent, as a people. And my presentation actually, and as I said, I will very quickly just look at a few aspects, but hopefully when you are going through it in your own time, you can see those 4 issues covered, why the CFTA and Agenda 2023 implementation issues. Then I'll conclude with a little bit of successful factors or conditions for success. And here I want to start by saying that the CFTA rationale is actually just as old as when the continent started to organize itself. From the OAU, that is supposed to be OAU, through various other continental plans, the Lagos Plan of Action, and of course the NEPAD vision and the CFTA, there has been, and it has always been, the intention of the country, of the continent, to organize towards one continental economy. And the rationale is very clear, has been presented by many players and stakeholders and champions from the Kwame Nkrumahs of this world through all the way to today when you talk about President Mbeki and others. So it's actually an intention, is a vision that the continent has had for a very long time, and we're beginning to see it being realized now. And when you look at that slide, and I hope my slides are moving, you can connect actually the Agenda 2023, the 7 aspirations, the 20 goals of Agenda 2023 are all about 4 things. And if you have not seen Agenda 2023 documents, I would encourage you to actually look them up, because they're important and they're about our own collective responsibilities as individuals, as countries, as regions. It's about 4 things. One is wealth creation, and that's what we're talking about, transforming our natural resource, our human capability and intelligence into value that supports our livelihoods, which is the second point, livelihoods and prosperity. And the third one is about our own ability as a continent to actually provide the capability to do the first and second one. And thirdly, the last one, fourthly, that we are able to do it in the manner that respects, supports, and sustains our natural resource base. And you would see then, therefore, that is the CFTA, together with the enabling factors, are all actually what Agenda 2023 is about. And the CFTA, you can say, are the legs to carry Agenda 2023. And you can see that when you look at the other frameworks and programs of Agenda 2023, they are actually clearly supportive, integral, and complementary to delivering on Agenda 2023. You have the CADAP on agriculture and food systems, there's energy, transport, where we also have the transcontinental highways. ICT, water resource, and there are several other flagships, as well as the continental programs that complement the CFTA. And then you'd see that the rationale for the CFTA, as was mentioned, and these are points that raised also in the poem and from Dr. Moyo, we have as a continent a capability that is actually a scandal that today we can be the most undeveloped, so to speak. You're talking about a combined population of 1.2 billion as at now. And what is this? This is market. And there are other continent countries that have exploited nothing more than just this. If you look at India, you look at China, one thing they exploited is actually the size of their markets internally. You are talking about a combined GDP of 6.7 trillion. And this is massive power that the continent can sit in the global platform and say, here, look at me, and I'm not an underdog. Business, consumer spending there, and of course, companies and all that. And it's very clear that we need to build, and we have the structure as a continent, building from national, regional, into the continental space. And it's also very clear, and this we have seen out of 5 decades of development. And I'll make this point again, that there is no sustainable success at national level. You need to connect transnational, regional, and continental level for sustainable economic growth success. And we do know from that, the reality that without adequate expansion in our industries, in our markets and trade, Africa will continue to be an enabler to other economies. That's what we are at the moment, importing, exporting, only in the manner that the other continents, other countries actually benefit more than ourselves. So this integration of Africa's economies is actually a very #1 success factor if Africa is going to talk about sustained economic growth, improved livelihoods for its people, and actually becoming a global player in the manner that we can actually champion and direct global movements in many aspects. As I said, I was going to emphasize the point that there is no sustainable success at national level. We need to connect national, regional, and continental. And the main rationale is scientifically proven. We've seen it. Even big economies of South Africa, Nigeria, etc., may not be sustainably successful if other countries are actually remaining behind. So that continental average needs to be lifted, all of it, and that is a responsibility for all the 55 member states of the continent. So we know the continental free trade area covers actually both trade in goods and services. And today, the issue of services is just as important as goods. And this is also where we're saying it's not just about the natural resource base. It's also about the services that now actually have got value just as much as our physical resource base. Issues of intellectual property rights, which is actually, again, is actually a resource. It's about our intellectual capability as a continent, which many times we don't package, many times is left just like that and not being supported and used effectively. I'm about to finish. I think I'm still in my 10 minutes. So the last point I want to give, and this is in terms of concluding, is actually what do we need to be looking at and where should we be engaging in a conversation like this so that we are part to implementation of the CFTA and ultimately development as at large. So issues that need to be addressed of infrastructure, both soft and hard infrastructure, the regional value chains, which is very clear. There's a lot of actually support and potential that when we can realize by focusing on regional value chain. Industrialization, and Africa has been said sometimes to have been deindustrializing, but we should know what this is. And in fact, we need to define industrialization within the context of Africa's own priorities, perceptions, and actually what needs to be done to realize that. Emphasis on the importance of trade, but also other services, like I was saying, that are a critical part of the value that we generate in the GDP. These are about business, the cost of doing business from improved investment climate, the Pan-African Investment Code, and also cross-border investment financing and systems. As we know and see actually that there's a lot of constraints, especially in trans-border aspects. And here you can see in my last point there about some of the questions that we can be dealing with, which relate to implementation, because to have the CFTA is one piece, but to actually get it done is another. And that is where the rubber hits the tarmac, and that's where we need all of us in terms of examining some of these very practical problems that even countries, many countries and other countries have shown us that they are willing, but there will be challenges, there will be constraints to enable them to move on that willingness. And this is what we can be dealing with, examining and supporting the countries to address those elements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. You have reminded our participants of a couple of things. First, that youth is the constant factor. Secondly, that it's not so much what our governments can do for us, but what we can do with our governments for ourselves. More importantly, what struck me is that this notion of Africa being one coherent entity moving in unison has been here since the days of Kwame Nkrumah. That makes it older than me, Martin, and that not many people are older than me at my age. So the real question that I hope the rest of the participants can help us answer is why, if we understood this concept as early as during the late Kwame Nkrumah's time, are we still now merely celebrating the signature of the agreements rather than the achievements of the agreement? My sense is that it's one thing to envision, it's another to conceptualize, it's another to write things down, it's another to agree. In God's name, it's another to execute. And so with that, I turn to the other panelists, because I think you have put an important issue on the table. I would now like to invite Ms. Fati Mzizi Hassan. Fati is the head of Human Capital and Institutions Development Division at NEPAD. And she's going to give us a perspective on AfCFTA and what it means for the continent. There you are, Fati.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you all. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Nkosana Moyo and all the Minds team for co-organizing such an important meeting. I wish to recognize the presence of Her Excellency Graça Machel and the one of all the distinguished speakers and participants. I've been requested to come and share with you my perspective of what AfCFTA means for the African people. You had a very comprehensive description of the AfCFTA by my colleague, Martin Bwalya. He also mentioned Agenda 2063, which is our overarching continental vision and blueprint. So as Sheila just mentioned, I am in charge of the Human Capital and Institutions Development Division at Agency-NEPAD. As such, my team and myself deal with 5 major challenges: gender equality, education, nutrition, health, and employment. We support AU member states in designing and implementing initiatives, projects, and programs that can contribute to providing a decent life for all. So when it comes to AfCFTA, the lens I personally took at the matter, is how the agreement can help create the 15 million jobs the continent needs every year in order to absorb the youth entering the employment market. There is no magical formula or silver bullet for job creation, but we know that some of the conditions need to be met for economic growth to drive employment. One of these conditions is the existence of a vibrant local private sector. One of our targets as part of the first 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063 is to ensure that 30% of the manufactured goods purchased on the continent are produced by businesses owned by Africans. So before we talk about trade under the agreement, we need to talk about entrepreneurship. A successful entrepreneur is someone who is able to find a solution to a specific problem to the extent that people are ready to pay in order to have access to the services or the goods. The median age in Africa is 19.7 years old, compared to Europe, 43 years old, and Asia, 32 years old. It means that 50% of the African consumers are under 20 years old. With the new generations that were brought up with new technologies in a very unique social economic environment, it very often takes a young person to understand the needs of this young market and to create the relevant solutions. Having said that, how do you support the youth to take advantage of something as groundbreaking as the African Continental Free Trade Area? The main goal of the AfCFTA is to create a single market for goods and services, facilitated by the movement of persons. The area is being implemented in two phases. The first phase provides a framework for the liberalization of trades in goods and services. For the trade in goods, the agreement sets the path for eliminating tariffs on 90% of product categories. Currently, 50% of African exports go to other African countries, compared to intra-regional trade level of 58% in Asia, 67% in Europe, and 31% in North America. If you focus only on food, beverages, and tobacco, the intra-Africa trade numbers drop to 9% only. We at AUD-NEPAD see this as a huge opportunity for African micro, small, and medium enterprises to address the needs of new markets, even beyond national spaces. As my colleague just mentioned, and my colleague Martin just mentioned, in 2019, 1.9 billion people were living in Africa. And we know that the flat combined GDP was $2.6 trillion. By 2050, African population will triple compared to the year 2000, from 800 million people to 2.5 billion people. The Republic of Niger alone will be 80 million people, compared to just over 20 million today. So the session and the interest generated by the AfCFTA are opportunities for the youth to get better acquainted with the vision of an integrated Africa, but also with the overall institutional framework of the African Union, and the role they, the youth, should play in achieving the Africa we want. You will have, hopefully, a very comprehensive description of the AfCFTA process by my colleague, Peter Joy Sewornoo. But it is also important that you become aware of the other strategic tools and frameworks that have been developed and adopted by your leaders, as they all serve a specific purpose and all speak in a very intricate manner to codependent issues. In addition to the AfCFTA, it is important that you know about, for example, the Protocol of Free Movement adopted by the heads of states and governments in January 2018, the African Youth Charter adopted in Banjul in 2006, signed and ratified by South Africa in 2009, which underlines the rights, the duties, and freedoms of young men and women. It also paves the way for the development of national programs and strategic plans for their empowerment. It's important that you know about the Continental Education Strategy for Africa and the related African Continental Qualification Framework. As informed African citizens, it is crucial that you keep yourself informed of the implementation of these frameworks at national, regional, and continental level. It is important that you keep your leadership accountable on the commitments they have made together at some point to reach a certain Africa we want. And when I say commitment, I have to be very clear. Someday in 2015, President Zuma physically raised his actual hand to adopt Agenda 2063 on behalf of South African people. There is a document somewhere with President Ramaphosa's signature committing South Africa to implement the AfCFTA, and so on. So your leadership has a responsibility before you to advance these frameworks. And you have a right and a responsibility as citizens to follow up on these commitments made on your behalf. The reason why it is important, as we discussed AfCFTA, to also step back and reflect on the institutional framework is that only the combination of these agreements, strategies, and protocols will deliver on the vision of a prosperous Africa. Imagine a young South African being able to get their design and carpentry degrees in Rwanda, for example, then moving to Cameroon when they have a good job opportunity and where the degrees are recognized. Then this person decides after a few years to establish a business in Cameroon. They would import a rare type of wood from Gabon, neighboring Gabon, for example, produce high-end pieces of furniture and export them easily all over the continent and even beyond. This is the Africa we want. This is the Africa imagined by your leaders. But it is now for all of us to make it happen. I hope you're up for the challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fati. As we know, the continent's two leading institutions, one is resident in Addis Ababa, where, if you wish, the political leadership convenes. And then we have the development arm, which is resident previously in Tunis, but now in Cote d'Ivoire, which is the African Development Bank. The African Development Bank, as the name implies, is the development arm of the continent's initiatives to see itself through. And with that, I'd like to welcome Ms. Bokang Mokati-Sunkutu. She is going to give us the ADB's perspective on the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Bokang, please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Sheila, for giving me the floor. Just like the previous speaker, I think I would like to really thank Minds for inviting the African Development Bank to this very important, to be part of this important conversation. I would like to also recognize the presence of Her Excellency, Madam Krasa-Machel, who is with us today. It's really an honor. Now, coming to the question of what really the AfCFTA, the success, what does it mean for me, and I guess for us at the African Development Bank. One of the key success that we will look at would be the point at which Africans are able to trade with each other. That will be a success of the AfCFTA, because as we have seen from Martin's presentation, for instance, trade among African countries still remains low. And then secondly, one of the key successes would be having the African private sector, the African business, being among the key beneficiaries of the free trade area. As you would imagine, this is a very big market, and we would not want to see it being just one big market for multinationals but not necessarily benefiting the Africa business, both big and small businesses. So that is really what we look at. But having said that, I think one of the key considerations that comes to mind is what will it take then for African countries to be able to trade with each other? We are not very industrialized. We still have many of our countries, for instance, being largely dependent on the extractive sector for the revenue. And then we have the continent also, we still really export largely. The minerals are exported, or our natural resources are really not very much processed. We are not adding much value to that. So that is a key issue. And then the manufactured goods that we are importing, we are among the highest importers in Africa. About 60% of we manufacture about 60% of the manufactured goods that we actually consume in Africa. So this, for us, it's very key. Therefore, that means we need to industrialize, because we need to have the goods that we can trade to be able to trade with each other. And one other interesting thing is that we are still a net importer of food in Africa, despite really all the good things that were mentioned by the poet Relebohile at the beginning of this session. Without really being sounding like a pessimist, but I think the other consideration that comes to mind is that while we have the goods, we may have the goods, how do we get them to the markets? How do we move our goods across the continent? We need the infrastructure. But we've seen that our infrastructure is not very good, meaning we are not very connected physically in terms of infrastructure. And coming from that, with those needs that we have with the infrastructure, right now, when you look at the Program for Infrastructure Development for Africa, which is one of the key programs that are looking at really promoting connectivity and enabling us to be able to produce the goods that we need, is that we have currently a gap of about $270 billion US dollars in financing gap for infrastructure, about 253 for investments, but also 27 billion in terms of what is required for project preparation. This is quite a huge gap. And that means we need to, our governments need to be able to, they need to mobilize huge amounts of money. And I guess this is where the African Development Bank, that's where we come in as one of the Pan-African institutions that were established to basically look at working alongside the African governments and African countries in trying to achieve economic development for the citizens. Our mandate involves mobilizing resources to support the regional integration agenda, the integration agenda of the African Union. And I would just like to also refer to another worrying issue about the youths. According to the study that was conducted by the bank, we are estimating that on average, there's about 11 million youths who are entering the job market every year. And yet the jobs that are created are about 3 million, leaving quite a huge gap. And this begs the question, what happens to those 8 million who are not able to be adopted by the job market? But that is not really it's not all gloom and doom, because the intra-Africa trade, one of the things that it brings for us is that, one, it has enormous potential to create employment, especially for the youth. It gives us the opportunity to promote the product and export diversification, which we really need for us to be able to trade amongst ourselves. And secondly, from the African development's perspective, also we've found out that increased credit to private sector will have a significant positive effect on the youth employment. So all of these things, when you bring them together, then comes to how do we then, what do we then say in terms of regional integration in this space? from our perspective is building the infrastructure that is required to be able to have the goods moving from Cape to Cairo. We know the dream about connecting from Cape to Cairo. We need to be able to achieve that. And in terms of transport, we need also energy to be able to manufacture for our industrialization agenda. We cannot achieve that if we continue having the power cuts that we're having. Hence, it's important to invest in the energy sector. Telecommunications, I think we have seen with COVID, how the telecommunications sector has kept us going. Right now, we wouldn't probably ordinarily be having this session has it not been for the telecommunications sector, but the costs are still high in this. The access remains an issue. How do we then get to have affordable communication, accessible, the connectivity? And the other issue of the policies that member states need to put in place, the regional institutions that we have to be able to facilitate this work that needs to happen, the harmonization to get all the member countries moving along in the same direction. All of this is really the things that we need to take into consideration, because these are the enablers to the intra-Africa trade, to the AfCFTA as well, having the right policies in place, and as well as things such as value addition. And how we do this, some of the things that need to be done from the African Development Bank, yes, we can work with governments and the private sector, the loans, the financing, I think is the main issue. How do we then help the entrepreneurs to be able to access finance? This is where we come in terms of the AfCFTA to be able to get it off the ground. But we need to also take into account the financing that is available. A lot of countries are now under a strain in terms of their fiscus. They're under a lot of debt strain. So it means we need to think of innovative ways of getting the financing that is required to build the infrastructure, to provide support to the various governments in terms of being able to put the policies, and to also do the work that is required, the knowledge side of things. It's very important for us to engage with member countries to be able to provide the advice that is evidence-based. So this is also key for the AfCFTA. And right now, what we're doing in the African Development Bank, we have among the key priorities to try and support the AfCFTA and the Agenda 2063. We have initiatives such as Jobs for Youth, which speaks directly to the needs of the youth. And this is very relevant to the AfCFTA if we are going to talk about mobility between the countries, skills development. And if we are talking about the jobs for youth, for instance, it's not only limited to youths being employed, but also the entrepreneurship. How do we support the young people to be able to come up with their businesses and flourish? How do they access the resources that are required for that? And one other very key instrument that the bank has, or flagship rather, is the Africa Investment Forum, which is a platform that the bank president, Adzogenu, launched in 2018 as a vehicle for mobilizing additional resources to be able to tap into the resources that are there, financial resources, to be able to meet the gap that exists. And this to be able to tap into specifically the private sector financing, because this is one area that we are trying to say it's not only about governments providing the resources, but we have the private sector that can play a very critical role in mobilizing resources for these projects. So I think for us, from where we sit, we see the Continental Free Trade Area as a very important and a very powerful tool to achieve most of the development challenges, objectives of Africa. But the financing, making available the right instruments for the youth to access finance, whether it's from the commercial bank or from the international development finance institutions like ourselves and others. And also providing that playing the advisory role to governments, engaging with the young people to be able to provide the advisory services that are required to see which is the right direction to go. Policies that are conducive for trade to happen through the various other instruments that the bank have. Just be mindful of the time that I've been given. So I think I'll stop here and will encourage the audience here to visit the website of the African Development Bank, which has more information with regards to how the bank works with different groups, the private sector, the youth, the programs that we have, some specific programs that are targeting women entrepreneurs, for instance, in terms of gender, to get all the information and to see what opportunities exist from the African Development Bank. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bokang. Between you and Fati, you reminded us of a couple of other, if you wish, missing pieces and essential ingredients. Fati reminded us of the role that the private sector can play. She also reminded us of entrepreneurship that speaks almost directly to each one of us as individuals to unleash our creative capabilities and take advantage of the dispensation. You, however, put a few enormous roadblocks in front of us. $260 billion is not child's play. And if you compare that with the continent's GDP, you start to see the order of magnitude of what we're dealing with. I'm reminded also that ICT is particularly problematic, not to mention cybersecurity as we transact into the e-commerce space. But I think these are important issues to grapple with, because if we delude ourselves in the belief that signing the agreement is sufficient, then we won't get there. The real question that I hope we get closer to answering is, in the space of all these challenges, whether it is infrastructure, education, unemployment, et cetera, who is going to do what when? Because ultimately, when we pin it down to those specifics, that is the only time that we will be able to achieve the end state vision that is envisioned by our principles. But I'm getting ahead of myself, as you can see, Bokang. So let me give the panelists a chance. We have, after Bokang, Dr. Edem Adzogenu, pardon my pronouncing of your name, sir. He is the co-founder of AfroChampions initiative. And he's going to comment on the contributions to the agreement from a private sector perspective. So he's going to answer for us the question that in part both Fati and Bokang put on the table, which is to say, what is the role of the private sector in moving this forward? You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. So, Your Excellency, Madame Grasa Machel, Your Excellency, my brother, Dr. Nkosana, and of course, the entire Minds team for being able to organize this and inviting me to share some perspectives of the work that we as AfroChampions on behalf of the African private sector has been doing in collaboration with the African Union with respect to the Continental Free Trade Area. And I think you laid the nail right on the head when you talked about the importance of being able to get private sector to have ownership or to feel involved in this process, because that's where you find entrepreneurs, The truth of the matter is that governments do not trade, it's companies that trade. So you cannot be talking about a free trade agreement without the people who trade being at the center of driving that agreement. And there's a lot of submissions that have been made, very glowing submissions about the outstanding work that, first of all, the vision of our founding fathers and mothers, as well as also the major contributions that have been made by different stakeholders and institutions, some of whom I've spoken already, like NEPAD, African Development Bank, among others. And all of that work continues. UNECA, UNDP, many other institutions continue to support. Where we think that there is a gap now, and there's no shortage of a lot of these agreements that have been signed at multilateral levels, at political levels, execution has been the challenge on the continent. We all remember the Yamoussoukro Open Sky Agreement that was supposed to enable Africans to travel across one open sky, just like we see in Europe, America. And yet to travel through Africa today, it costs more for a person to go for a honeymoon from Ghana to, say, the Vic Falls in Zimbabwe. It's more expensive than just going to France or England. And so at the very core of the CFTA is movement of people and also the movement of goods. And it's some of the infrastructure issues that we talked about earlier. It's part of the reason why it's more difficult to move across the continent and more expensive. And the policies are there to facilitate them, but the execution lacks thereof. And then there's the issue about also being able to move goods across the continent. It's actually easier to bring finished goods from Vietnam, China into Africa than to move goods from the Mombasa port to the port of Bangui, which is just separated by two countries. In most cases, it has to go all the way down to Cape Town, come all the way past Mombasa again, go all the way to the other end, to Douala, and then track and come back to Bangui. So this is a challenge that faces us. And yet the continent has produced and continue to produce the brightest minds. We continue to evolve into higher institutions and continue to find Africans leading in global multinational institutions, and we're proud of that, global multilateral institutions. So what is the problem? Why is it so hard? Why is it so easy to be able to bring goods, manufacture them, be able to produce cheap energy, all the way in countries as far as Asia, Southeast Asia, and be able to move all of those goods onto the continent of Africa much cheaper than where the raw materials are? When we have the dam of Inga, which can electrify the entire continent, where we have the human resource as well. So I think that's what speaks to your point about how do you piece it all together? Because that's the problem. You know, we work in silos. We find Africans in the creative space that are producing incredible talents who are able to cross over the continent and go and contribute to the NBA, Hollywood, the music industry, generate a lot of economic activity and GDP. You spoke about GDP. And the African contribution to the GDPs of those economies are incredible. And yet, we struggle to find that value addition taking place on the continent. So AfroChampions, the organization I chair, realized that there were two problems. One, there was a public sector that continues to formulate all these great policies. Then there's a private sector that are entrepreneurial. 80% of our economic activities at the level of SMEs, but they remain segregated and convoluted. And there's some disconnect between the policy and the implementation and the people that we rely on to execute. Because at the very base, they just want to earn a living. And so you find them going as far as Dubai, China, to just go bring goods and sell and try to make a profit just to earn a living. So the first thing we decided to do was to ensure that, to commit to the fact that we will not allow the CFTA to suffer the same consequences that other initiatives have suffered. So instead of just waiting and like most people are doing, or most people tend to do, for governments to lead in this process, or to governments to figure it out, to tell us what to do, we think that our governments have done the best they've done, because that's the best they could do in terms of being able to create the policy. It's our responsibility now, and by this I'm talking about the youth generation, to take control of that CFTA, to understand what it is, and to map it out in a way that aligns our personal and individual visions with the broader objective and goals of our founding fathers. So I'll just list 2-3 things as example that we have done as AfroChampions to be able to add value or to give meaning to the CFTA and use that as a way of encouraging you to be able to look within as opposed to looking without. Now, the first thing we did was, again, to forge a partnership with the African Union, because we thought that private sector on the continent has a lot of capacity. And yet, we've seen how in the last 15 to 25 years, we've seen the emergence of African multinationals that didn't exist 20, 25 years ago. We see Standard Bank, we see EcoBank, we see MTN. These are all companies that grew out of the minds of people, started off as an idea, a startup, and now they are multinational companies, employing so many people, breaking the barriers to regional integration, trade, moving people, capital, goods across the continent. And the capacity, a lot of capacity exists there. And also there's a lot of power within our Pan-African institutions to be able to formulate these things. What we've tried to do now is to become the bridge. So the public sector does not continue to see the private sector as just people who want to just make profit. And the private sector doesn't just see the Pan-African institutions as just organizations who just formulate policies and don't implement. Because the responsibility now is on the private sector, the youth who occupy close to 80% of the population, depending on which age we're looking at. But the median age of the continent currently is 19 years, which means that the continent should be the freshest source of ideas for development, for transformation. And the belly of the continent, which our sister who spoke in the poem, should be where a lot of people come and industrialize, add value to the things they want to produce, and be able to feed the entire world and serve the entire world, and also to be able to support the industrial complexes of the world. So CFTA clearly, because I don't want to go into the statistics and all of the things that have been said, it gives us that opportunity. But where we have been really focused at is 2 areas. One is in the creative space. We launched a project called Nefertiti. And Nefertiti basically, which is an acronym, looks at the creative energy that exists among our Africans. Now, whilst we're waiting for the roads and the rail and all those things to be built, immediately we can begin to using the digitalized systems that we have, which has a huge penetration in Africa more than many other countries in the world, begin to move goods. We need to move our indigenous arts, music, and so many talents, latent talents that remain to be unearthed because people just don't even see what they do. We see how much artwork are fetching millions of dollars across the world now in auctions and in runways all over the world, whether it's in fashion, whether it's in, and we know the vibrancy of what Africa has in terms of its culture, its indigenous, the story behind all of these things, our food, our music, our movie industry from Nigeria, South Africa, and all of these places. And there's a story we could tell about all of these things. So how do we begin to start putting value upon ourselves? Mindset is going to be very key, because otherwise we could build all the rules and all the rail and we'll still go outside to go and bring goods to sell among ourselves. 2 problems remain. One, Africans, and which we can afford for African youth to fall in, which is that sacrificing long-term strategic planning for short-term gratification. And secondly, looking for others to always legitimize the things that we are doing. If we can just start putting value on each other, once we're able to solve that mindset issue, there's nothing that we can set ourselves to do that we can do. And I'll give you one example. When COVID came, we in AfroChampions brought together a group of youth and said, COVID has a tendency to derail the Continental Free Trade Area. So it was very important that we should look at all the things that could derail the CFTA. One, our supply chains were being disrupted. There was a deceleration in the demand for our natural resources and goods, which is what we depend on for our survival. What can we begin to look within to do? So bringing a group of startups and innovators together, we went to the Africa CDC, which is the premier continental institutions driving the public health coordinated and harmonized intervention and response against COVID, and said that, how about creating a platform that will enable movement of people that has currently been disrupted to ensure that there's a trusted mechanism through which labs where tests are being done in one country can be validated by the other, so that we don't have a situation where, because we can see in Africa today, part of the mindset challenge. Africa is open to the rest of the world. The rest of the world is open to itself. Europe, America, China, people traveling through freely. In Africa, we're opening to the countries where most of the key diseases were coming from, the variants were coming from, and yet we remain close to ourselves. And part of it is the lack of trust among ourselves, the lack of value among ourselves. So with this technology system, we call it PanaBios, which we offered at no cost as a digital public good to the African Union. We now have a situation where Kenya has currently gone live, a number of countries are currently going live, and now we have a group of startups who were not known influencing how we move around on the continent, just based out of the ideas. The other thing we've done in partnership with the African Continental Free Trade Area is built a digital tool to enable things like what I talked about, ability to own your intellectual property on your artwork, your music, and be able to get money for it. So people should still be in Africa and be able to earn money from all over the world based on something they own and belongs to them and stays here. So with the AfTA app, the AfCFTA app, www.afcfta.app, you can go in there and generate your CFTA number. And that CFTA number is actually a profile, just like your LinkedIn profile, that begins to create an ecosystem of youth and SMEs all over the continent. Because the person in Botswana who wants to buy peanut butter is most likely going to import it from a shop in London called Holland and Barrett than to buy it next door. So part of the problem is we don't even know what we have on the continent. There's so much silos that exist on the continent. So you've got the thinkers, the leaders who are formulating policies. You've got the thinkers, the economists, the scientists who are inventing and creating. You go to our labs today or research labs and there's, shea butter, moringa, the cosmetic industry. There's just so much knowledge out there, both indigenous and also refined. And yet, those raw materials leave the continent, whether it's in cocoa. So you can take every sector, food, cosmetics, medicines, and there's just so much knowledge on the continent that research has been done on. And yet today, the likes of moringa are now all over in health food stores all over the world. We find foods from all over the part in Africa, and yet we're not adding value to the things we have. So the initiative we've launched currently with the CFTA Secretariat is the super app that will enable us to have an ecosystem of traders so that when you move your goods from one country, you can passport your standards. You don't have to go trying to register the product all over in the next country again, which is the kind of cost and challenges that we go through. And at the same time, also being able, using the app to be able to know who is doing what, to be able to know which business association they belong to, what are they serving, and also be able to connect lawyers, standards organization, consultants, research people, all within an ecosystem using the digital infrastructure that we have. We think that there's a lot of money on the continent. There's so much, Africa is long on opportunity, short on capital, but the rest of the world is long on capital and short on opportunities. Part of how we're going to make CFTA work is when the youth begin to add value, take the ideas like Facebook started, it was just an idea, and create that ecosystem that enables many people to see value in being a part of what we're creating. So I'm going to stop there, and maybe during question time, I can come back and talk a little more about some of the things that we're doing. But I would like to close by just saying that with the partnership that we forged with the CFTA Secretariat, with the Pan-African institutions like the AU and Africa CDC, on the other institutions, some of whom we've spoken to, have been speaking already, we are committed to unearthing the incredible potential of opportunity and resources, human resources that exist within the African youthful population. And we look forward to working with Minds to be able to educate and share more of these things so we can tell your story and amplify it in other parts of the continent. Other parts of the continent should be benefited. There are amazing things happening on the continent. We just don't know each other. We're just talking to each other. And we think that using these digital tools and apps, which is where a lot of the youth today belong, we should be able to refine our stories. So imagine just we deciding every week of the year to eat food from one particular country on the continent. That's incredible amount of value that could be added. And people coming up with various ideas of what they could do with that food and that recipe. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. Looking within as opposed to looking without. And once we're able to lay the foundation of what we're able to do on our own, so many people will want to be part of our story. And people will invest, people will bring value. But first, we have to get our house together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very insightful. So we started off by acknowledging that we are a wealthy continent. Then we started off by saying for 60 years we have had visionaries. And then somewhere in between, we've come up with regional and inter-regional protocols. And now we are at the stage where we now have to make it happen. And we realize that we have limited infrastructure, but you have just reminded us that limited as we may be in terms of infrastructure, we are not limited in terms of people that are intelligent and able to be creative and able to find solutions that can overcome. And that all we need to do is look to ourselves. I'm reminded of a song by the Jamaican legendary musician Bob Marley, and he said something like, "None but ourselves can liberate ourselves from mental slavery." So let's see if we can achieve that. Thank you once again. I'll now move to Ms. Nomazulu Mzizi. Nomazulu is an African female entrepreneur dealing with African raw materials to create organic products. And she's going to answer the question, what changes does NAFTA, what changes does the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement bring for her business? There you are, Nomazulu.
Good afternoon, everybody. All protocol observed. How are you, Mom Gracia Michelle? Wow. Thank you so much to all the panelists. I've been listening and I've been asking myself, how practical are all these policies? You know, at the end of the day, as a business person who brings in all those products that we've been talking about, that the poet spoke about, that we're so rich, we have all these minerals, we have all these plants that are out there in Africa. How practical is it, therefore, to then trade amongst ourselves and value what we have without having to bring them in from outside, or like what one of our panelists was saying, that sometimes you find that you have to take a product from one place, which is literally next door, but then the system wants it to go all the way around. So I'm asking myself, how practical is it? So I'll show you a product, for instance, shea butter. It's a very popular butter. We bring this in from Ghana. Our company brings it in from Ghana. And probably this is a 1 kg of shea butter. Maybe to buy it in Ghana from the markets, it's made by locals in Ghana. It would probably cost in rands, say 20 rand. But then the retail value now here in South Africa for this 1 kg ranges from 200 rand to 350 rand. And that's because there's transportation involved, there's customs payments involved, and all the hands that it has to pass through. And so even if I were to travel from South Africa, go to Ghana, find it in the markets, get the best, I still have to pay for things like transportation. I still have to pay for customs. So I understand that you're talking about the agreement, but how effective is it? Do people even know about it? Can I then go now, I've got goods waiting at customs at the airport. Can I go there and say, look, the AfCFTA agreement says I can take my stuff without paying customs bills and will they hear me, or I'll seem like, do you understand? Are those agreements actually out there, or it's things that we keep talking about, but they're not effective? I'd like to also bring to your attention this powder. It's called chebe powder. It's a powder that's been known to grow hair and help with hair retention. We bring it in from Chad. So now this powder is a very controversial powder, especially when I'm bringing it in. They test it for marijuana and da. So all those protocols and laws, which are okay, they do protect us. But at the end of the day, at some point, I think Dr. Edem mentioned it, we don't know what we have. So you find that sometimes they seize chebe powder, which is from Chad, which is an African product, which we should know and be able to grow in our backyards, but then it's labeled as a problem product. But then if you put it in a nice capsule, bring it in from China or bring it in from wherever, EU, and make it look nice and package it lovely, you'll get it easier, which is sad. It's an African product, which is used by fellow Africans, which works within the continent. But then if it comes now packaged from an American brand, then it's easier to bring it in, or it's easier to put it into your general stores, your discounts, and so with us as producers that work with niche products, you find it's difficult. The red tape is so much. And so my question again, how practical is the agreement? We spoke of the funding and how the African Bank is, so the African Development Bank is talking about being able to give youth funding and all these resources that they're talking about. But the truth of the matter is, try to get in there. It's red tape after red tape. If they're not asking you about, so the ideas are there. I'll speak for myself. The company's there, it's running, the products are working, and everything is effective. But then bring your business plan, bring in this, bring in that. And then us as Africans, we put our own, how can I put it? We put our own red tape or our own roadblocks, like you've mentioned, Sis Sheila, that even if we are trying so hard to be innovative and creative and bring in beautiful products as Africans, amongst Africans, and trade within ourselves, but at the same time, there's a tendency of sort of holding each other back, just because it's an African youth trying to bring in a product. So the question is, what does it have? Why did you put this? Is it going to sell? Where is your plantation? Where is all, like, the questions and the reality of us being able to actually access that funding as compared to what we have on ground? Half the time, it ends up being people who know people who end up with the funding. So we have nice presentations. We have beautiful stories to tell about all these agreements, about all these banks and the private sector coming in to help us and asking us as the youth to come up with ideas and be innovative and all that. But the question is, how practical is all this at the end of the day? I would like to show you another product. This is Tetraplura. I'm not sure what it's called in different African names, but it's a product that is used, so you break it down and boil it and make a tea. It's great for different things like your diabetes. It's great for libido. It's great for period pains. And it's a product that we bring in from Nigeria. Okay, so now when we package it, we just sell it as it is, and we give instructions, just boil, and just like Dr. Edem was talking about moringa and all that. Okay, it's something that really works and goes out there. But the problem is the presentation. As Africans, we have a problem of wanting things to look a certain way for us to believe that they work. And these things, sadly, are part of us, it's what we have, it's who we are as Africans. We grow up on these things, but then when you're presenting it and you're selling it like this, someone looks at it and it's like, But then when I bring it in as a capsule and it's accredited from, it looks very pretty, and it comes from a pharmaceutical background, all the way from America, for lack of a better place that I can think of. It looks better. So as Africans, in as much as we talk and helping each other and using the raw materials that we have on ground, we also have a problem within ourselves of accepting things as they are and being able to trade and with all that being said, I remain with the questions representing the youth and African youth entrepreneurs that on ground, on paper, and all the banking sectors and institutions, we are grateful, we love the initiatives, but how practical are they? Do people even know about all these things? It was new to me when I heard of it. So how practical is it? Who gets to see these agreements? Are they out there? Are they on Facebook? We spoke about Facebook and social media. Are they there? Do people have access to it? That is put even in our varsities or schools. How practical is it? That's all for me in general, and thank you.
Sheila, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Nomazulu, and congratulations to you and your partners in the different parts of Africa. I guess when I listen to you, a couple of things come to mind. The first is the importance of the architect of this dispensation, clearly breaking it down to what it delivers and what it doesn't deliver. What I suspect it won't do is do away with the sovereign status of the 53 member states. It just won't do that. And my guess is that there will be a level at which protectionism at national level will contradict this dispensation. Having a clear sense of what those areas are that are the preserve of sovereign states and those that are in effect in the domain of this agreement, I think is the single most important thing that the people who thought of this dispensation can do to manage expectations from the private sector perspective, because I doubt it will be all things to all people. For one, it won't do away with border control. It won't do away with national legislation. For that matter, it won't do with the requirements for health protocols when you're moving material from one country to a country, which is living material like plants or animal tissue. These are just basic things. And I guess from the speaker that preceded Nomazulu, that is where the spirit of enterprise come in. How do you overcome this? Because my sense is that they will be with us. But let me now invite Mr. Peter Joy Sewornoo, who is the senior advisor to the Secretary General of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, in the hope that, as a parting shot, he can address some of these things. One of the things that concerns me is that we've spoken about the dispensation in a glossy manner, but everything has limitations. It would help the audience say, if you could share with us, what in your view are some of the issues that are not addressed and are not intended for this space, so that when people come to you and your colleagues with expectations, these expectations are aligned to reality. So over to you, Say. You have the last word.
Thank you very much, Ms. Khama. Yes, so I was actually billed to come earlier, but apologies, I'm now coming. Yeah, so the nature of my presentation was actually to give a description of the AfCFTA. So my greetings to you, Ms. Khama, to my big brother, Dr. Edem, Adzogenu, and then the other excellencies. Yeah, so I would like to just do a quick presentation. But given the fact that we've had some previous speakers, I'll just run through very quickly. I think the question came up a couple of times, even from the last speaker, is it Nomazulu? Yes, asking in terms of practically what the AfCFTA means to her, a business person bringing, for example, shea butter from Ghana. And then just listening to her, I went across to check in terms of shea butter, and then looking at in terms of the applicable rate, the duty rate that shea butter attracts in terms of taking it from Ghana and then to South Africa. And then just looking through the tariff book, I noticed in some cases for shea butter, it's about the duty rate is about 20%. So the key question then is if she's doing business and then there's no AfCFTA, she would have to be paying 20% duty on the shea butter she brings from Ghana. That's a lot. So in terms of the practicality, she won't be competitive if there are other producers that are getting it at a much lower or at a much cheaper cost. So in terms of the practicality of the AfCFTA, currently it is 20%, but once the AfCFTA is fully implemented, the hope is that depending on where South Africa, for example, puts shea butter in the basket in terms of whether 90%, 7%, or 3%, eventually, if it's, for example, the 90 or the 7%, then eventually it's going to go to zero duty over a period of time. So that means a lot. It means a lot for her in terms of the fact that previously she was paying a duty on shea butter she brings from Ghana to South Africa, but over a period of time, she's not going to be paying any duty. So that would help her to become more competitive. So I'll just run through. I think Martin did a great and wonderful job by presenting in terms of what the AfCFTA means. I'll just run through to touch on some of the key highlights in terms of the opportunities. So one of them, for example, is we have 55 African countries. So if you have a market just of South Africa, you don't have that bigger market size. So by having all of the countries coming together, you have about 1.2 or 1.3 billion people. So if previously you had less people to as your market size, now you have more people you can actually market to. And then in terms of the World Bank carrying out a study and then saying that total exports would increase by almost 20% relative to what we have currently. These are some of just the opportunities. In terms of some of the areas my previous speakers may not have touched on, I'll just give these key dates and then I'll come to the architecture where I can then explain some more. So for example, if you look at January 2012, that was when a decision was taken by the African Union Summit to actually have the AfCFTA. So it first started with BIAT and then came to the AfCFTA. And then the launching was actually June 2015. In February 2016, that was when the negotiations actually began. So the first meeting of the negotiating forum actually began at that time. In March 2018, the signing of the agreement, or the agreement, was open for signature. And I recall Dr. Edem, Adzogenu, you were there, and then the first AfCFTA business forum, you organized that as well. So for some of you, as you may have heard, on the spot that day, it was 44 countries. So South Africa, for example, at that time did not come on board, but then there was also something we call the Kigali Declaration, which basically means you giving your affirmation to the fact that you're still committed to the agreement, and that at a later stage or at a later point in time, you would come back and then sign the agreement. So South Africa did not sign that day, but later they signed. Today they are a state party. Another key date that you would also want to know is May 2019, when the agreement entered into force. In July 2019, in Niamey, the operational phase of the AfCFTA was launched. And then, as you may know, last year, February 2020, His Excellency, the Secretary General of the Secretariat, was also elected by the heads of state. It was a very tedious process where more than 150 people applied. They scaled it down to 30. 6 people were interviewed. 3 were basically recommended to the Executive Council. The Executive Council then could not have an agreement, so it then had to go to the summit, where there were a series of elections, and then His Excellency the Secretary General was finally elected. And then if you come down to August 2020, that was when we moved to Accra. So everything you see today in terms of the structure of the AfCFTA Secretariat actually commenced or was handed over in August 2020, and then we started operating from Accra. Another key date is the 1st of January 2021, when trading actually began. So in all of the previous times, either it was the launch of the negotiations, it was the launch of the operational phase of the agreement, or it was the agreement entering into force. In terms of actual trading, it started this year. Now, I'll run quickly to give you, in terms of the signatures and ratifications. So the first thing is to sign the agreement. The next thing after signing the agreement is to have the agreement ratified. After the ratification process, you have to take the additional step of depositing your instruments of ratification. So you may have signed the agreement, you may have ratified the agreement, but if you don't take the additional step of depositing your instruments of ratification, it doesn't count. That's why today, you may have heard we have 36 African countries that are state parties to the agreement. There are 19 that are yet to come on board. That 19, for example, would exclude a country like Cape Verde. Cape Verde has actually ratified the agreement, but they are yet to take the additional step of depositing their instruments of ratification. So until that is done, you are not counted as a state party. Now, coming to the institutional structure, the question may be asked, so in terms of the question posed earlier, you need to know the institutional structure in terms of how the decision-making process works in the entire AfCFTA structure. So as you may see, or as you can see, we have the AfCFTA Secretariat, one of the key organs of the institutional structure. So more like administering the implementation of the agreement. So the Secretariat is headed by His Excellency the Secretary General. We are autonomous from the African Union Commission, which is based in Addis Ababa. Another thing is that we also have a distinct legal personality. If you also look up, basically we organize the member states, and then what then would happen is a report is then sent to the Committee of Senior Trade Officials. So we had a meeting not too long ago where senior trade officials were called upon to decide on a number of things. The senior trade officials then report to the Council of Ministers with responsibility for trade. And then the highest then is the Assembly of Heads of State and Government. We also have a dispute settlement body, and there are also committees and subcommittees and ad hoc committees. But this is the structure in terms of the implementation of the agreement. For the negotiating structure, it was slightly different, where we had a support unit in Addis Ababa, then there were technical working groups, there was a negotiating forum, there was a committee of senior trade officials, African ministers of trade, and then the summit itself. Now, running through very quickly, in terms of the AfCFTA architecture, this is how it looks like. So before, for example, you know what are the practical things that it means for you in terms of the AfCFTA. You need to also understand the architecture in terms of how it looks like. So for example, we have the agreement establishing the AfCFTA. And then we have series of, we have different protocols. So there's a protocol on trading goods. And even under the protocol on trading goods, we have annexes. So for example, on this tariff concession, and then the tariff concession then says a lot more in terms of the share barter Nomazulu would want to bring from, say, Ghana to South Africa in terms of the treatment South Africa is according to that particular product. There's also rules of origin in terms of determining the nationality of the product. So for example, just as when you're traveling to another country, you have a passport which then determines your nationality. For products as well, we have rules of origin that would then determine where the product is coming from. We also have an annex on customs cooperation. There's on non-tariff barriers. So in total, about 9 annexes. There are also appendices to some of the annexes. Another protocol is the protocol on trading services. So basically, the protocol on trading goods and protocol on trading services are in the phase 1 issues. Dispute settlement was negotiated in phase 1 because it was key and it's a cross-cutting things. Definitely in the implementation of the agreement, there may be issues that may arise from the implementation of the agreement. So that's also part. Now, there's also a group of issues in which we call the phase 2 issues. Before December last year, we actually had phase 2 and then phase 3. So for example, investments, protocol on competition policy, protocol on intellectual property rights that were part of phase 2. And then we had e-commerce as part of phase 3. But in December, a decision was taken by the Assembly to merge phase 2 and phase 3 issues. So currently what we do have is investment, competition policy, intellectual property rights, e-commerce, women in trade, and then even the AfCFTA adjustment facility. All of those are going to be negotiated as part of phase 2. So we have a deadline of December 2021 to complete those. Now, another key one to touch on is in terms of the modalities. Now, mostly you would say, okay, where's the agreement that we can see? You may see the agreement, but in terms of the details of the treatment that will be accorded to say share barter, you will not see it in the main text of the agreement. There's an additional document from where you can see that. So one of such is the tariff concession, and there are modalities to guide member states in the preparation of their tariff concessions or the tariff liberalization schedules. So basically, this is how it looks like, and this was what was adopted. But then a distinction is made between developing countries and then LDCs. And then there are 3 categories. We have non-sensitive products, which is the category of 90%. So for those categories, we are saying once the agreement starts, so once we start trading, you are committing yourself to saying that you are going to liberalize those group of products. So for some countries, they have 5 years to do that. Other countries, they have 10 years 10 years to do that. So I'll just give a quick example from here, and then we can jump, given the fact that it's only 10 minutes I have. So for example, if you look at the case of the developing countries, in the case of 90%, like South Africa, for example, falls in a group of developing countries, it will have 5 years within which to liberalize the 90%. And then for the sensitive product, which is 7%, it will have 10 years within which to liberalize that. And then if it is an excluded product, that means there will not be any liberalization. So I'll use the example of the share barter to illustrate what I'm saying now. So let's say, for example, South Africa, in the list submitted to the Secretariat, for example, says they are putting the share barter in the, let's say, in the non-sensitive list, which is the 90%. So currently, let's say it attracts 20% duty when you bring share barter to the country. So what this means is that South Africa is saying that for share barter, it will liberalize it within a period of 5 years. So South Africa would then give us a schedule, which would then illustrate how they are going to do it. So every year, so you can see in the bracket, we have a linear cut. So the linear cut just means every year there will be equal reduction. So South Africa will start from year 0, which is this year. So year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. So within that period of 5 years, South Africa would have to liberalize the share barter, which is attracting a duty rate of 20%, to become a duty rate of 0%. So in terms of the practicality, this is how it works in terms of the question posed by Nomazulu. Okay, another way, if you put the share barter in the sensitive product, which is 7%, that means it will take 10 years. And then if you happen to put it under exclusion, then that means for the period of the agreement, which then can be reviewed, it will stay as it is, which is the 20%. At one point in time, there was a group of 7 countries, which was basically Djibouti, Ethiopia, Madagascar, Malawi, Sudan, Zambia, Zimbabwe. They had made the case that the 90% was a bit ambitious for them, so they wanted to start at 85%. Initially, it was granted, but later they then came back to say, in the interest of solidarity, they were willing to go with the other countries. So as it stands currently, everybody will liberalize 90%, 7% for sensitive, and then 3%, there will be no cut. Now, this is for the tariff. If you come to trading services as well, this was what was adopted in terms of the scheduling of commitment. We may have to take another additional day to also explain some of these things, but because of time factor, I would just run through some of these. Now, in terms of the benefits overall, UNECA did an assessment when the member states started submitting their tariff offers. And then basically they came to, or they did a simulation and came to a number of conclusions. So on a larger scale, if you look at in terms of the benefits of the agreement for our people, for the countries, for the member states, one, as I said, you have an enlarged market size, and then there will be enhanced trade. In terms of the annex on non-tariff barriers, definitely it will lead to the removal of the trade barriers. And then it will also lead to improved investment prospects in terms of employment prospects as well. For example, His Excellency, the Secretary General, is establishing an AfCFTA academy here, which is a young professionals program for the youth, where they will come to the AfCFTA Secretariat for, say, a period of 2 years or say 3 years, where they are under steady or they work with a senior officer where they will understudy the AfCFTA negotiation and implementation. And then thereafter, they can go back to their member states. So given the fact that we're speaking to the youth, I would encourage you, when such an opportunity opens up, as many of you can take advantage as much as possible. I'll not run through the simulations done by UNECA, but just to go into some of the conclusions they made in terms of the impact on welfare, in terms of the impact on tariff revenue. So of course, if you are liberalizing your trade, you have some of these effects. And it is also for this reason why we have an AfCFTA adjustment facility that is also coming on board. In terms of small and medium-sized enterprises, we also have the trade finance facility that is also being developed together with other banks across the continent. Yes, I had wanted to touch briefly on the support by Dr. Edem, but he's also mentioned it in terms of the key role that the private sector is also playing. In terms of the super app, he's also developing to assist the work we're doing here at the Secretariat. And then this very slide, just giving some instances of the COVID-19 and then the effect on the start of trading in terms of some survey that was recently conducted. Yeah, Miss Khama, Miss Sheila, yes, because of time factor, I'll pause here and then we can take the questions. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Actually, it was very helpful. But actually, we don't have time for questions. You can correct me,
okay.
Timekeeper. My sense is that we are left only with 5 minutes or so. Am I correct? Timekeeper?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Yeah. But I mean, this is a difficult thing for the moderator always to do. You know, we say to people we'll close at 3:55, people make plans. My sense is that we should respect that. So I'm going to try and summarize the questions. And I do this as feedback for the Secretariat in the belief that you will take them and find ways to communicate with your stakeholders throughout the continent and bridge what is a clear information gap. I mean, the one thing you've said to us is that the agreement says Africa, but actually it's not all of Africa, because to date, only 36 have signed. I think this is important for people to reckon with. But you've also put a qualifier to it, which is to say, even the 36 that have signed the protocol, about 18 still have to do the necessary, go through the necessary governance process of depositing some documents. That then means that it's no longer an aspiration, that it is legally binding. What you've also indicated is that there are certain milestones that each country must go through to cross certain gateways. There's some window of 5 to 4 years over which they can still transist from the state at which they are. And so traders mustn't assume that even when these agreements have been signed, the legal arrangements and the commitments made by countries will kick in. My sense is that this needs to go out big time to the Africans. I think the Secretariat through social media and other platforms needs to state and almost have a countdown country by country for those countries that have signed in terms of where they are in this process, so that entrepreneurs don't go to country as can be told, actually, child, we are not even members, or we are members, but actually we've only signed the political statement. We haven't actually gone through the other stages. My sense is that keeping that going, or if you already have it, making sure through social media people know it exists and where to find it will be very helpful. I think it's also important, if I read you correctly, this is voluntary. Countries don't have to. There's no obligation. And so some may never be members. And I think just articulating that upfront would be helpful. Here are some of the questions that I saw in the Q&A, which are really critical. The participants asked very important questions like, it's all very good to trade together, but have we harmonized infrastructure in terms of, say, education standards? Am I going to go to country X only to find that the education standards, the safety, health and safety standards for goods are different? And where they differ, where does this leave me? My sense is that this is very important. I think also others have said, give us a timeline. What are, from the Secretariat's overarching position, what are the major milestones going forward? What can we expect? And again, I think this is important. The youth are very anxious to know, is there a specific space for youth and areas that are set aside specifically because we think for the youth, they speak to their capability, their energy, and for that matter, their ability to compete. If a process through this dispensation could look into those things, some of the participants think that that would be helpful. Others have also asked the question, Africa is divided, at least colonially, in different regions. We have those that are Portuguese-speaking nations with different legal systems from a commercial and a judicial perspective. And then you have the Francophones, and then you have the Anglophones. The question is, how does the current agreement treat this? That's one of the things that you might wish to address yourself to. The sense is that we are speaking only on the good things. And some of the participants have said, tell us what is problematic about this. What has you implemented has proved problematic, and how are you addressing these things? But more importantly, I have only picked up a few of what I thought were the recurring themes. Some were specific questions, but some are themes that are recognized coming through. And for those who are interested, you can go to the Q&A. You will find not only questions, but to the extent that some of the participants have responded, you may find that somebody has specifically responded to your question. And so with that, I think I am going to thank everyone for joining us. Acknowledge that this is a process. We can't possibly answer, much less address all the questions now, but that we at Minds are committed to continuing dialogue around particularly the trade question, the intra-trade question in Africa. So I think I speak for the leadership of Minds, Graza Machel and her team, but I also feel I speak for her and her board members, myself included, in saying that you will be hearing from us on singularly the issue of intertrade, singularly the issue of youth. I personally am a passionate person about the arts, so I was very pleased to hear my brother speak about the value of the arts, because very often think of the brick and mortar issues as the value of things. But we delude ourselves if we don't recognize the value of the softer things, but also the nimble nature in both technological and trade terms of those non-physical objects of our capability as Africans, including knowledge that can be used in different areas. And so without belaboring the point, let me thank Minds for arranging this. Let me thank everybody, especially the panelists. Let me thank the participants, and thank everybody for your time, and say, without a shadow of a doubt, you will be hearing from us. Thank you, and goodbye from Gaborone in Botswana.